Welcome all. Thank you for coming. This is part 2.5, I guess, almost part 3, right? It's part 3, but it's only going to be a half part. So today we're going to talk about, it's all about the kids, which is basically an addendum to the other two. We're going to, let's see, does it switch? Okay. Not doing it there. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little backstage tour today, since it's a more intimate group, I believe. We're going to talk about how we go about, or how someone would go about looking at the text and figuring out a problem that arises in a text. So before we get to the text, I'm going to give you some background. The way I look at text is called the literary approach. And that is a modern-ish approach, although all the classic Meforshim also use elements of this, they just don't have the same names for it. And it's an approach that looks closely at the text, and it's adopted by most of the professors at Bar Ilan, including Rav Yoni Grossman, who's at Bar Ilan. Rav Elchanan Samet is not, but he's also an Israeli. Judy Klitzner, Yael Ziegler. They have great books if you want to read any of these people. I think most of them write in English as well. And so therefore, they're my mentors, but my very personal mentor is someone in North America. His name is Rabbi David Foreman, and he is Aleph Beta really, and he's written many excellent books in using this methodology, and I highly recommend them. Again, email me and I'll be happy to share good suggestions with you if you tell me what you like. So that's the who is doing this literary approach, and we're going to learn more about what it is right now by these are the 4 topics we're going to talk about today: outliers, intertextuality, inclusio, and chiasm. Some of you might have heard chiasm before if you were in my other classes, but we're going to add the other 3 today. So because it's all about the kids, what better way to start with than Sesame Street? Okay, you wonder that this is really not professional of me, but I tell you, Rabbi Foreman always uses this analogy as well. He doesn't sing the song, although he could, and this is what it is if it shows up. Here it goes. Of course, the key will be getting back to the screen. Oh no. 1. Not working. Okay, well, we know that song.
It's not that easy, but Grammarly can help.
That song, of course, was One of These Things Is Not Like the Others by Sesame Street.
Grammar and spelling.
And we're trying to get back to where we belong. Okay. Now we're going to go back, hopefully, to like the others. I'm going to pause you. We know that song, right? Let's go back to my screen. Okay. So there we go. So one of these things is not like the others. We're going to look through the text that we're coming upon, and we're going to say, what is the outlier here? What is the thing that doesn't make a lot of sense? So here's the text, and I will read it in Hebrew because the Hebrew is obviously better, but because of time constraints, if you don't know the Hebrew, please follow along, okay? Vayarsham Yehuda bat ish Knani. So please note that this is the very beginning of the chapter. I'd like, as I read it, for you to give me what you think will be a good title for these 4 psukim, and also look for the outlier. Okay, Vayarsham Yehuda bat ish Knani ushmo Shua v'ikachea. So he took a wife. V'tahar v'teled ben v'ikra et shemo Er. So he had relations with her. She conceived. She gave birth, and she called his name Er. He called his name Er. V'tahar od v'teled. I said I'm not going to read the English, so I'm not going to anymore. V'tahar od v'teled ben v'tikra et shemo Onan. V'tosef od v'teled ben v'tikra et shemo Shelah. So number 1, if anyone wants to pipe up and tell me what a good title, very basic title for this section would be. Okay, so let's call it Birth of Children. Nod your head if you think this is a good title. Birth of some children. Okay, yes, good. So the outlier, did anyone pick up what the outlier might be? If there's a series of 3 here, there's 3 things.
The last one, it says where he was, and the first 2 doesn't say.
That's very good. And the Mefarshim do pick up on that and do talk about it, and we will actually talk about it later. But if the things are sort of similar, then there's a difference between one of them. Then I'm just going to tell you because of the time constraints. Let's just go through it. The first one is v'tahar v'teled, right? So betahar, the vav indicates one thing happened, second thing happened, vateled. She conceived, and she had and she gave birth. Next one, betahar od vateled. So she conceived again and gave birth again. And od is a logical thing because this was the second one. But then the question is vetosef od vateled. So the question is, why not just say betahar od vateled, right? What's this strange word going on there? So I'm going to contend that that is an outlier. And we're going to try and see, but first, before we see and we make an idea about what it means as an outlier, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it really an outlier? And so in order to do that, we have to use something, and let's see if I did it right. Right, so we just finished the outliers, that was what it was. We have to use the concept of intertextuality. And what does that mean? It means taking an idea from here, a word or a phrase from here, from this portion of the text, and another similar word or idea from a different portion of the text, comparing the two and see if it makes sense. So you can't use intertextuality on a phrase like Vayomer Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemar, because that just happens too frequently and it wouldn't make sense. You can't even use it on the root word of Yosef, like Yud Samech Peh, because that also can be in different contexts, etc. But if the word occurs in relation to giving birth, does that make sense? Can we really say it's an outlier? So if anyone wants to pipe up quickly and tell me, where would I look to see a succession of children born in relatively quickly that I might compare this succession of children born in succession and that one?
To Yaakov?
Beautiful. So in Yaakov, and specifically Leah. So let's go there. We see for Leah's children, and these note that they're also consecutive psukim. So Betar, Leah, Vateled, we don't really need to read the rest of it. Betar, Od, Vateled, exactly the same wordage for not 3, but now 4. So we're starting to say, okay, so maybe it really is an outlier. If we had more time, I would say to you, please look here because there's another section of outliers that we could identify here. So I'm just going to show it to you just to say that the text does this a lot. So each of these says that she conceived, she bore the child, and it was named, and the reason for its naming. But in each of these, there's something different. 3 times she gives the child a name, and the 3rd time for Levi, he gives the child the name. So therefore, you have to ask the question, okay, so that's obviously the outlier. So what changed? Why is there a difference for Levi? And you can go to Rashi and find that answer. That's not what we're going to talk about tonight, but I'm just trying to cement the idea about what an outlier is by showing you how it is here. Okay, so we've said, as a recap, we have the Vetosef od Vateled for the 3rd son of Yehuda. Okay, but now the question is, it doesn't seem to be regular, because if it were regular, it would look like this, Betar or Vateled. So therefore, we can still call it an outlier. And we're going to go to one more instance where children are born. Anyone want to suggest where that might be? Not a lot necessarily, but a couple of children. Okay.
Moshe?
Moshe has his children, you're saying?
Moshe's children?
It could be, but I can check that, but that's not where I went. I went to, so we've had, I'm just recapping for you, right? So we see that the regular pregnancy is Leah's. We're still wondering about our word Vetosef, and we're asking who the next person we're going to check it against. And that person is going to be Chava. Okay, so we're going to look at some psukim on that. And it says here, and again, read the English if you need to, because we're time constraints. So we've seen that for our first child, V'tahar v'teled seems to make a lot of sense. At Karyn v'tomar kaniti ishet Hashem, same kind of thing as Leah, right? She names him and she says why they name him. V'tosef laledet et achiv et hevel v'hi hevel ro'et son v'Karyn haya oved ahadama. So the question is, now we see the word Tosef again, but there's a slight difference. So we're going to go back to our chart, I believe. And let's see, yes, we're going back to our chart. And we see the Tosef again, but the question is, what happens here? What does it mean? So of course, then we can make a projection, an assumption, but we'd rather go to the Mefarshim. So let's see what I think it's Radak. Radak is going to say this, and I have to move you all over here so I can see what it says. We're going to read the English this time. So the construction of Vetosef laledet instead of Vetahar od Vateled she again became pregnant and gave birth. So two things, remember the two vavs, vatahar, vateled, and here it's just one vav, vatosef laledet, right? Support the word of our sages in Breshit Rabbah 22:2, that the two brothers, Karyn and Hevel, were born as twins. The birth was additional, not the pregnancy, right? So for the first one, it's Vatar Vateled Karyn, and then for the second one, it's Vetosef Laledet, because she didn't get pregnant, she didn't tahar again, she didn't get pregnant again, she only gave birth again. Okay, so do we see what's happening here? I'd love to stop and get all your feedback, but we can't. So here we go. At the end, if you have questions, keep them to the end, unless you feel, Elaine, something is really unclear or somebody texts you that it's unclear. Okay, so here we go. We have the idea that Leah had regular births, one child, one pregnancy, Vatar or Vatilet. For Chava, she said Vatosef Laledet for when it talks about Hevel, right? And one pregnancy, but a twin birth. Okay, so we're still at a loss to understand what this means. So we could postulate right now, because the words are similar, right? It's intertextuality. We now say not just it's about pregnancy, but this word appears again. So let's see. We just found out that Vatosef could mean that that she was pregnant with twins. So let's see. Could that be that Bat-Shua, that Yehuda's wife, was pregnant with twins? Okay, and I just recap that for you. So now I bring the Tur Ha'aroch, the Balaturim, on this pasuk, and it says, she continued to give birth to another child who she named Shelah. I find it peculiar that on this occasion, again, the translation, I don't know if it's exact, but because peculiar is sort of an odd translatable word. On this occasion, the Torah does not mention Bat-Shua's pregnancy before mentioning that she gave birth. Perhaps we may explain this as her having become pregnant with two children at the time she conceived Onan. You know, Onan is the number 2 child. And that there was an interval between Onan's birth and Shelah's birth. Not so scientific in my estimation. This could be borne out by the wording of the verse that refers to the birth of Shelah as an additional birth, the Tosef, right? Just like it was for Chava, for the twins. So now, I would love to give you time to figure out what the problem is with this, but obviously, as I just alluded to, the problem is science. And moreover, the Pesukim also give that, and this is, I believe somebody mentioned it before. So the problem, anyone quickly want to say what they think the problem is? Okay, I'm sorry, I'd love to wait, but not today. So the problem is, if we look at the Pesukim and we talk about that second portion, right? Here, for the first 2 sons, it doesn't say where this happened, but the last one, it says, V'haya b'chziv, meaning that Yehuda was in Chziv. So does it really make sense that Onan, the second one, and Shelah were twins? So really, the first one came out and then he said, oh, gotta go to Chziv, see you later, guys. And then the third one was born. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But there's a much bigger problem than that. But I'm sure the Balaturim has his reason. I don't understand it. So, and I don't think that it makes logical sense. And this is the second reason why not, because remember when Tamar came and said, okay, she didn't come and say, but when the second son had died, she said she obviously wanted to marry the third son. And Yehuda says to her, stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. So if truly they were twins, like the interval could not have been more than an hour or a day. I mean, I've never heard of twins being born, 10 years apart. So therefore, it doesn't make sense that he would tell her to until the son grows up, because if the first son was already ready to marry her, then it was a twin, then the second son would almost be ready to marry her at the same time. So therefore, I believe that they were not twins. So in that case, we still have the issue of what does this mean? Why is it Betosef Odlet Beteled for Bat-Shua, for Yehuda's third of his first set of children? Because remember, he had twins at the end. So how are we going to explain this? So we're going to go to another idea. And so we have outliers. One of these things is not like the other. We have intertextuality, using one phrase or word from one section of the Tanakh to another and trying to compare them and understand one from the other. And then the next thing we have is an inclusio, which basically is a fancy term that means bookends. So I'm going to stop talking about Yehuda for a few minutes and talk about Ruth, the book of Ruth, because that has a very beautiful inclusio that I think will explain it quite clearly, and then we can go back to the story at hand. So in the book of Ruth, this is the first and the last pasuk. So as I read the Hebrew, because the English translates it quite poorly, I believe. Not poorly, but in the wrong order. So I would like to read it in the order. So it says, Vayhi bimei shvot hashoftim, vayhi rav ba'aretz, vayelech ish mi Beit Lechem Yehuda, lagur b'stei Moav, hu v'ishto u'shnei banav. Okay, that's the very first pasuk of the first parak of Ruth. And then the last pasuk of the first parak of Ruth says, V'teshav Naomi v'Ruth haMoaviyah chalata ima hashava mistei Moav v'hema ba'u Beit Lechem b'tchilat katsir seorim. Okay, so you can obviously see that there's a parallel wording, parallel things are happening between the two situations. And specifically, they, at the beginning, right, they leave Beit Lechem in Israel, they go to Sdei Moav. And then on their way back, it says they return from Sdei Moav and they go to Beit Lechem. So it's obviously really makes quite a beautiful lot of sense. But it doesn't end there, because there's another, there's more that's parallel. If you look at the orange, Vayhi bimei, right, that's a timestamp. So we've had basically where they're coming from, where they're going to. Now we have when, right, the orange, they're coming and shvot hashoftim, and they're coming back at the time of the harvest. And then of course the yellow part, who is doing this? So we have when and where and who v'ishto shnei banav, and then coming back is just not without obviously the people who have passed away, but Naomi and Ruth. Okay, and so now we're going to ask ourselves, how does this all fit? So this is an inclusio, because at the beginning it gives you the information, and at the end it gives you the same information, and it's supposed to focus you on being really clear about what happened in the story beforehand, so that you can go on and read the rest of Perek Bet and Gimel and Daled. Okay, so now we're going to learn something else. We're going to talk about something else, and that's the last idea, chiasm. If you've been to my classes before, you have heard about chiasms, no doubt. But this Ruth inclusio is a beautiful chiasm, and I'd like to emphasize, please, that not all inclusios, not all bookends are chiasms, but this one happens to be, and it looks quite beautiful, right? This is the order of, do you see my cursor? This is the order the pasukim flow like this, and pasuk aleph, and then the last pasuk it flows like this, okay? And in the middle, you see the body of Perek Aleph. So oftentimes in a chiasm, there will be just, instead of the whole Perek, or the Perek minus these two psukim, there'll be maybe one or two sentences in there. And basically it looks like an arrow that it's directing you to the most important part of the story, which is in the crux of the chiasm. Okay, but here it's not here, it forms a slightly different idea, but it takes you in and pulls you out. That's the idea of the inclusio here. So now we're going to go back, I believe, if my next slide is correct, to our story about Yehuda and Tamar. Let's see. Yes, we are. So now we have talked about the beginning of the story, which I have told you, but I'm hoping you agree with me that the title of that story was Children Are Born, right? And then we had the problematic word of Vatosef od vateled, right? Now we're going to look at the end of the story, and I would like you to just read it on your own, and I'm going to wait for somebody to say the answer. What would you say is the title of this little section? Do I have to do it again? Okay. I think we can agree, I'm hoping we can agree, that the title of this section would be Children Are Born, right? We had children are born at the beginning, we have children are born at the end. But what is interesting is if you look just the pasuk before this, which is why I left the big space at the top, here it comes. That is the pasuk, if you were with us for the first two, where Tamar says to him, Hakerna, and he says, Tzadka mimeni, and that is really the climax of the whole story, correct? And then we have the denouement of the story, which is all the children being born. But then we have this little inserted green part, which is Velo Yasaf od Lidata. This is after he realizes Tamar is his daughter-in-law and he's now had relations with her and she's pregnant. He either, and then before she were divided on this, he either continued to have more relations with her, or as the text states outright, that he no longer had relations with her. So that's a machloket, and you can look it up and if it interests you, or you can text me and we can talk about it. So, but the idea is it's definitely a non sequitur right there, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense. He's talking about the grand climax of she recognizes and he recognizes and it's all good and everybody knows what's going on. and then they're talking about the relationship they're having, and then there's that whole thing about their kids. So if we look at it like we looked at Ruth,
It's 7:51, just to let you know.
I'm sorry.
It's
Oh, thank you.
7:51.
Yeah, we're done. We're almost done. Another 1 or 2 slides. So, right. So now we come back in the beginning again. I'm just reiterating that this is a story about children being born. And then at the end of that story, there's the Tosef Od V'Teled. And if we want to look at it as a chiasm, as we did for Ruth in the colors, we see that it looks like this. Introduction, at the beginning of chapter 38, there's the birth of 2 sons. At the end, there's the birth of 2 sons. But with the birth of the third son, there is the problematic outlier word V'Tosef. And at the end of the whole story, just before the second set of 2, well, the last 2 sons are born, Yehuda and Tamar, the relationship is talked about in this terminology with also the word od, right? It's also interesting, the word od. It's also interesting, the word leda'ata seems to have the same resonance in terms of the slil, the way it sounds, as leda'ata and v'teled. Those are the similar letters among them. And then of course, v'tosef is, or v'tasaf is, v'yasaf is the same word with the same root. Okay, so the question is why? Why did the Tanakh do this? And so my contention, based, remember, on my first 2 classes, was that this is the hidden message that Hashem embedded within this to say, really, this is not a story about Yehuda and Tamar. This is a story about Yosef, because I have inserted where you should start looking for the story of Yosef, which is with the birth of the 3rd son, because if had the 1st or 2nd son stayed married to Tamar, then there would be no issue with this whole remedial and the whole thing that Yehuda went through in order to transform, right? So it only starts with the birth of that 3rd son, because he's the problematic son that never marries her. And then it ends, right, with Hakerna, and then boom, it's over with the Yosef Od Ledata. And then of course, the last 2 sons are just, as the first 2 sons, not relevant to the part in the middle, which is the story of Yehuda's transformation. And with that, I will suggest that God hides these things in the Tanakh for us to find them. It's a way for us to connect with the Tanakh and to look at the stories. The best compliment I ever had was a woman who has been learning with me for about, I don't know, 6 months. And she said, I saw her on a Sunday, and she said, oh, in shul yesterday, I was looking at the Tanakh and I saw, she didn't say, oh, no, and the thing that you told me was like the truth. I saw that. No. What was really complimentary is she said, I looked and I saw a problem. And you know what? A few psukim later, I realized that the word that was used there, and I could really answer my problem by looking how the text used that word. And I go, I've done my job. Like, I want you, my students, to go and engage with the text in whatever way you want. I want you to think that it's fascinating and it's wonderful. And then I want you to look at it more critically and make it really your own. And I think this is one of the ways you can do that, by looking carefully at the words and coming up with postulations about what might be and what could be, and talking about it with your friends, your husband, your Rav. Well, don't bother him too much. That's, but, or me, because you know what? I'm about to give you my email, and I'd love to hear from you about anything you want to hear from. And there's 5 more minutes for any questions you want. And did I record? You know what? I might not have recorded. Oh my gosh. Shoot.
It says record, the button is on.
It's recording.
It does say recording? Okay, very good.
Yeah, it's recording.
Okay, so I should stop the recording, or any questions? Okay, so I'm going to stop share first. Okay, good, it is recording, good. Okay, no questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming for these 3 sessions. I hope it's been good. I promise not to give another one next week. And I will stop recording.
So next week, 1 second, next week, Rabbi Metz